Aloha. Talofalava.
Pulaminaka.
Hapade. Hello, and welcome to Utopia.
Since 2009, Utopia has worked with queer and trans Pacific Islander leaders to create a safe, welcoming, supportive, and vibrant space for members of our community to address basic needs, build pathways towards new expanding career and life opportunities.
Our mission here at Utopia is to provide sacred spaces to strengthen the minds and bodies of queer and trans Pacific Islanders through community organizing, community care, civic engagement, and cultural stewardship.
Our vision is to create a world of cultural wealth, dignity, healing, and liberation for cutie pies that honors our ancestors and supports future generations and ourselves.
One of our values here at Utopia is dignity. We believe in the importance and worth of every person in society. We aim to assist in building that leadership. We believe that everyone is worthy of honor and respect.
Afio Maya. Our doors and arms are always open for you. For more information, you can visit our website at www.utopiawa.org. Thank you, and we hope to see you soon.
Talanoa is a word that is derived from the Samoan culture, which means having a conversation. This word can also be broken into two. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie, which brings us to Talanoa. Utopia Washington has created Talanoa as a platform to provide safe spaces for our queer and trans-Pacific Islanders to have a conversation, share their stories, and for community members to make a connection. While Talanoa is usually hosted in person, due to the pandemic, Utopia Washington has been able to utilize digital platforms to bring you Talanoa virtually. We are glad to have you here with us today. Welcome to our Talanoa.
Bulvinaka and good evening. Here in Washington, here at Utopia, Washington, we continue to recognize that as diasporic indigenous people reside and pull resources from ancestral lands of the Koshalish people, the Duwamish, Makushut, and Puyallup nations, it is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us and other settlers, colonizers, and indigenous people to reside on these lands, and to seek on analysis and continued understanding to our place within that history and present being. I also would like to acknowledge that our panelists here tonight are joining us from different parts of the region and countries in the Pacific region, and also here in the US. And then there'll be different framing where how folks will talk about the way that they're organizing in different region and contexts. And without further ado, I would like to bring our panelists to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Whakaalofa tu ki mutulu o si koe ha koe ngō ko Felicia Brown-Acton, koe tau mututu puna ha ko koe ki pule mutuli ki si i kine pule, koe matua whiwhine ha ko kumeli ko risi la tongi i kine pule pāpani, koe ha ko maanga ko whine ane ha ko puatua, koe ha koe mutuku niwe whekai. Greetings to you all, Felicia Brown-Acton, I hail from the village of whine ane ha ko puatua, Niue Island, by way of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland City in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm the Executive Director of Whine Pacifica Aotearoa Trust, which serves the interests and the needs of Pacific Rainbow, LGBTQI+, MVPF+, and queer peoples in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is a great honor to be here to contribute to this panel, and I thank Utopia Washington family for allowing me the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Felicia. I'll now give it to Vivian Tatawanga.
Bula and greetings everyone. Good afternoon from the burning west of Fiji, from Nandi. My name is Viva Tatawanga. I'm a management collective member for Deal for Equality, or Diverse Voices and Action for Equality Fiji, one of the only lesbian-led organization here in the Pacific that works around in Fiji and works also do a lot of work with women's movement within the region, the Pacific, and also globally with some feminist organizations. And part of the work that we do, that I'm also going to be speaking on, is the work that we do on gender climate justice and all other work, sexual reproductive health and rights, and so forth that we'll be discussing today. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to a very productive conversation. Naka.
And I give it to Eroni Dina.
Bulavinaka, everyone. My name is Eroni Lendondina. I am indigenously from the Southern Islands of Fiji, Kandahar Province, also known as the Bird Island. My mother is from the beautiful, friendly islands of Kima. So maloilele to everyone who's listening in as well. I'm the program analyst for Pacific Sexual and Gender Diversity Network, a regional organization that looks after 14 national member organizations from across the region, and we provide assistance where it is, especially where the need is within the terms of legislative changes, lobbying, etc. And we provide support in that area. I'm also the Pacific regional representative to the ILGA world, and I'm glad to be here, speaking from the context of the Pacific, along with my other fellow sisters who are here as well, but more so from my indigenous own concepts within here, the islands of Fiji. Thank you. Looking forward to discussions.
Thank you, Eroni. Sina?
Thank you, Amasai. Hello, everyone. Aloha Lele. My name is Sina Wipi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm currently on the land of the Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I usually am in the east coast of the States, which is in Washington, D.C. on Anacostan land, and I will be heading back there soon. My parents are from the Kingdom of Tonga, specifically in Tonga Tapu and Ha'apai, but I also have roots in Samoa and Fiji. I am the policy associate for Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, which is a national-based organization here in the United States. And we focus on advocacy, leadership development, and research. Every issue is a Pacific Islander issue, but the ones that we focus on a little bit more are education, health, and immigration. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all to all our wonderful panelists for joining us in this Talanoa. And before we move on, I just want you all to feel comfortable and, get relaxed, water to hydrate yourself. And yeah, so welcome to Talanoa, the cost of inequality. We exist through intersections. So I know we talk more about the need to do this work, the importance of intersectionality and inequalities that exist in different areas of all our work. But then the beauty about having you all here is to talk about what intersectionality really means in your different contexts and how do you navigate in doing that. And this is why intersectionality is such a useful framework when it highlights how discrimination and exclusion are not simile and cannot, be solved by focusing on just one issue. We have to identify and talk about several other issues. And I remember the words of Audre Lorde, and I quote, there's no thing as single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives, unquote. And I put that you can put intersectionality into practice in your day-to-day life by being aware of how our own identity and relative privilege affect how you experience the world and how we navigate that in our own definition and our own narrative. And, so without further ado, we have an icebreaker question, which is my fault. We should have gone through that on the first phrase. So maybe we can talk about that as well. Is what piece of advice would you share with your younger self? Viva, I see you having some deep thoughts. So, what piece of advice would you give younger Viva?
Thanks, Amasai. I think for now that after doing this work 10 to 11 years now and understanding the injustice where it actually rooted from and why most of the time as growing up from as a young woman in a platform like in the Pacific, why we feel most of the time that um, we don't have a very strong self-esteem is because when you grow up, self-esteem is you're a woman, you belong here, you are not allowed to wear that, you don't go play outside, you have to stay inside. If I am to look back to my in the I would say like I will not allow anybody to tell me that I cannot do those things because it kind of really kind of slow me down in how I'm working on myself, and it would minimize all the trauma that I have to go through after coming to know about the work and understanding why it's important and understanding where and how injustice are actually implanted at a very early age. So, yeah. If I was to look back and advise myself, I would say learn to say no and just do whatever the hell I wish to do. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you. Any of you folks want to go next?
Sure, I can go. Yeah, great question, Amasai. I think I can't remember being so young because it's been so long. But I think to Viva's point about that this work, and I think about the impact that this work has had on me throughout my life. And I reflect on that, and not saying in a negative way or a bad way, but I wish I started my activism at the first day that I wore my mum's high heels at the age of 4 to 5. That it started there, and that's where it started. And but I guess that for myself was recognizing that in itself was a form of protest for me, basically stating or declaring that this is who I am. But recognizing that as a young person, I think is something that I probably wasn't attuned to. One other thing that really, really stands out for me is, in terms of advice to myself as a younger person, would be to tell my younger self to sit at the feet of my elders, immerse myself in the being and the present and the knowledge and the wisdom of my elders, hold their hands, care for them, spend as much time, even though this work's taken me away from so many of my elders who have left this world, and a lot of them leaving leaves me with this deep regret that the work was put before the time that I should have spent with them. So I would say to balance that, because the knowledge, the strength, the mana that my elders carried, they would be useful tools to continue to contribute to the work that I continue to do. And also because of their own experiences and their cultural knowledge, these are key concepts that continue as I navigate through my life, things that uphold me, things that nurture me, things that develop me. But the challenge for me is, how do I now, coming into this phase of being an elder, how do I contribute that back in the same way to generations that are behind me? So I just, that resonated with me around sitting at the feet of my ancestors and really just immersing myself in all that they are before they leave this world.
Thank you. Those wonderful wisdoms of our elders, the knowledge and manner. We all would have thought that it'd be nice to go back and do that and to really talk about. I would have wanted to know myself how would an elder Whakasalalea would exist during those days, the wisdom and modern knowledge that they take with them. Thank you. Sina, what do you have in mind? What's the advice for your younger self?
Thank you, Amasai. I think I like this question. I don't think I've been asked this question too many times. But I think something that comes to mind is don't let anyone tell you your community is small or too small. And that really comes from, the work that I do for Epic, but also, right, like in general, because at the end of the day, when we're done at our desk working, we're still Pacific Islander, no matter what. We don't get to turn that off, right? So I think being in the United States and experiencing what it means to be a Pacific Islander, a Tongan woman at that, first generation, born and raised here in the diaspora, what does that mean for myself and the people that I serve? As far as, when it comes to an issue like data, right? I think that's a huge problem in making sure that we have data just specifically for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities in the United States. And it's been grouped with other groups such as the Asian American group, right? So it's a little bit harder to kind of see and assess what our needs are. And that really comes from a place of operating from a place of deficit, I feel like, which is a very Western and also very American point of view in our community. And I don't view our community as that. I view our community as full of abundance and full of beauty and richness. And so, yeah, that's what I would tell my younger self. Thank you.
Thank you, Sima. And Eroni, that leaves you to, saving the best for last, I guess.
Oh, girl. This question always gets me because it really pulls at the heartstrings because it puts us in a position where we have to reflect about what we were like when we were younger. And let me just tell you a little about who little Eroni was. Little Eroni got caught a lot of times wearing mom's clothes. Got caught a lot of times putting on mom's heels, which obviously led to a good beating, some sort of verbal discipline. And little Rhonda hurt herself a lot emotionally. I never hurt myself physically, but I was hurting myself emotionally. And that's a different kind of pain. And I would isolate myself from my family, from my community. Interesting. The moment I heard that question, I pictured myself when I was a little kid, when I got caught returning with one of mom's heels in my bag. And I spent the whole night outside. I wasn't allowed to come back in because I only had my siblings. My parents were at home. And that was their interpretation of what should have been done at that time to little Rhonda, little Eroni. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that share that same story, some of us on this panel as well. And I tore myself up for the whole night. I was like, why am I this? Why am I a certain way? Why do I want to do these things? We as children, unable to fathom what we're supposed to be as a person, we're still trying to learn. We're still trying to learn who we are. And these were the pressures that society had placed on us. I would tell little Rhonda, don't beat yourself up too much. It's important that you find yourself. Know who you are, know who you're meant to be. Find the vision of who you are that you want the whole world to see. And it doesn't matter what other people want you to be, because as long as you're happy, little Eroni, you're going to be amazing. So that's what I'll tell my little younger self.
Oh, yeah. I think I keep telling myself that I'm still young, and yeah, that's still part of the journey. Thank you all, for sharing your experience, and that little note to your younger self really talks about this conversation. And we go into, so let's dive into the what intersections do we embody or do you embody, and how do you inform that in your worldview, just as much as how do we tell our younger selves, but now how do we embody different kinds of intersections, and how do we do that within the world that we live in? Do we want to go around and round and see? Tina, what do you think? The what intersection do you embody, and also like how do you and how does that inform your work and your worldview?
So did you call on me?
Yeah. So
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Because I know Sina and Viva could sound alike sometimes.
they do, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think, um, when it comes to intersections, I I will always embody, the matriarchy that I come from, and also really recognize how that exists in our Pacifica community. I always tell people that the women in my life, my mom, my sisters, my aunties, really serve um, as a life compass for me, as a moral compass for me. They never steer me in the wrong direction, and I feel like our cultures and our families have always kind of had that power, that exists in our communities, and so I fully embody that, but also very aware, what that means for myself and showing up for queer and trans women as well, or queer and trans folks in general too. Um, I am always going to be trusting of the women in my life, and I feel like the best work comes from the women that are in our lives and that we are in community with.
Yeah. Thank you, Sina. Zero flow. Viva, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm maybe just adding on from Sina is that I think for myself, I would say the different intersectional identities I embody myself and my body is all these identities that I carry every day with me. I would say I'm a mother of three. I'm an Itoke Fijian young woman. I'm a management collective member for Diva for Equality Fiji. Um, and I'm a lesbian. So therefore, how the world views those different identities, intersection identities that I have, it depends on the different powers I play in those identities. There are ones that the world just once they come to know about that identity, that I embody that identity, I'm like crossed off a lot of spaces, and I'm sure you would understand which one of those 5 identities. The minute I come out and I be in a room and I speak about lesbianism, that's when we see face drops. See, they don't even care what you bring to the table. They don't even look at those knowledge that you're coming to share. But there are other identities that I wear proudly and in spaces, and I go into, and today I don't hold back from being both, being a lesbian, but still speak my truth on my views on different issues that I want to speak on. And I think that took a lot of work. First is to embrace, to understand the different identities that you embodied with yourself. And then you go out to the world and be ready that there's some identities that you will be knocked down by the minute you identify as that. So it's then your decision, your battles, the different battles you want to choose to fight. At one point, I must say, when I first came out as being a lesbian in my home, I was actually disowned. I was even told that I was not good enough to go to attend service with my family, right? So did I want to fight that? No, I respected that. But did that mean that I give up on my family? No, I find out other ways. And most of the time for us, from speaking from experience, most of the time for us that are living this kind of life with a diverse sexual orientation, it's always said that the only way that we work back into our family is if we are bringing something on the table, if we have to contribute something. And it's always, if we can bring in that financial support, that particular financial support, then you get to be there. And for some of us that doesn't, they don't get a chance to reconnect back to their family. They don't even get a chance to really be heard. They don't even give the privilege to even make decisions in most of the family gathering spaces. So I think how the world will see the different identities that we hold with ourselves, either they will celebrate with us or not. But I think what's Rhonda saying is kind of what should be our motto, like we are enough. And this is the identities we embody because this is the life we live every day. We live the life of being a mother. I have a 6-month-old baby. We've been up the whole night because she was sick, but still I have to come to do this work because I have to, because there's things that you still need to do. It's part of you being a management collective, being part of an organization. And still you have to make sure, like weekend, you're looking forward to your rest, but you have your work with your family, your children to take care of. So it's all that happening in the one body, and it's up to us and how we take care of this body and how do we really celebrate those different identities and how we choose. Either we listen to what the world say about the identities of this, or you keep being enough and you carry on the good work that we're doing.
Thank you. And on that note, Eroni, how do you intersect, the intersections of that you embody? How does it inform your worldview for you? And how do you navigate being apologetic?
Thank you, Ama. I'm so excited just listening to everybody's response to this because for me personally, I believe I am first and foremost. I think this is a concept of how I approach the world. I am first and foremost a global citizen, which gives me complete mandate to exist in every single space. What makes me unique? I am also an indigenous person. And what's a blessing for me too is my dad fell in love with a Tongan woman. And I have Intersectional's occupation of that space. And I'm blessed to have a wonderful mother who, just like Sina has talked about, has given me the opportunity to experience amazing maternity. Pacific women are wonderful maternal beings, and I'm glad to have that maternity raise me, and that's the same maternity that I have inside of me. Other than that, I'm a trans woman, and that gives me liberties in multiple spaces. Although people may see it as an oppressive situation, I don't see it as oppressive. I find that to be completely in control of my environment, and we as Pacific people, before colonization, we've always approached things maternally through the divine feminine. I always call it the divine feminine because of the culture of nurture, protecting our environment. It was all about nourishment, and it was all about community. I call that divine feminine. The system of colonialism is what I call patriarchal, which is all about destruction, overpowering, making sure that powers are recognized, risking and digressing. But anyway, those are the different intersections I occupy. I call myself a woman as well, because I use that to my advantage, because I'm human. We all wear different hats in different spaces so that our voices could be heard. And I'm glad to be all that. And that affects how I approach the world. At the end of the day, it always fuels my approach in making sure I am not diminishing anybody else's privilege when I identify my own. It's all about collaborativeness. Thank you.
Okay. And Mama Felicia?
Absolutely agree with Sina, Viva, and Rhonda. I too am raised by very strong mothers, raised by a single mother in the context of being born in a Western country. But first and foremost, before I am anything, I'm tangata niue before I am anything else. So my world views are based on those learnings and teachings. I identify as whakawhiwhine, but in the context of living and being born in the Western context, I identify also politically as a trans woman because it recognizes my lived experience of transition, trans medicine, dealing and working with professionals. But concept of the intersections, like I operate on the premise of lalanga or a weaver. And I don't think about converging intersections of my life because I view crossroads as something quite colonial in its nature. And when I think about the concept of weaving, I think about things overlapping one another. And how that contributes to the many intersections that inform my lived experience. You can look across a woven net and see imperfections or mistakes. And at any point, should you identify a mistake, you would understand that you would have to unravel the process and you would have to go through this process of working through how to rectify it. And these things are synonymous to me with relationships and having to navigate this multitude of systems and relationships within our daily work. And how that, again, continually feeds into things. So I sort of recognize that in the many things, again, recognizing what you said in the beginning, Amasai, we don't live single issued lives. And that's based on context, it's based on your upbringing, it's based on your experiences and your interactions and your engagements with people. And so to recognize that as an individual, that my experiences are the experiences of myself and they are similar to others, but not the same. So yeah, I just wanted to state that. And I think how it informs my work, and I use the concept of lalanga again, because when I see something wrong, it's really quickly, it's just like the weaving analogy. If you put 4 strands together and it's over, under, under, and that's a continual concept. If at some point you're doing the over, under, over, and something's not wrong, you automatically know to unravel it and fix it. So same thing, the same concept within all my experiences of all the converging strands that overlap itself, that are a part of my lived experience, how I inform my work, how I address things is all based on this concept of weaving. To be able to rectify things, to be able to communicate things, and all of this stems from the matrilineal aspects of my upbringing. So yeah, lots to contribute to that in a very mixed way of presenting that, but yeah.
Thank you.
Amasai.
Yes.
Could I just add? I see a similarity with our answers. I am so glad that we're making reflections of our indigeneity and the concepts that we have in our cultures. It's amazing. It also brings something to mind. Our understanding of community is so much more deeper than what's perceived through the white lens. If you can see what happens in a village, the koro, we have different denominations, but people are from the same village. We have different sets of beliefs, but we live in a village. The concept of living in a koro and understanding that even though we have different ideas, we occupy different spaces, it's important to exist together, no matter the differences. And I think the colonial experience has brought a change, a shift of that perception. And I guess we're challenged to unlearn most of that, decolonize our minds, and bring back what was good for our people. If I could just give an example, I shared a bit about at an Indigenous panel about if you see the village setting, for example, villages in Fiji, people were only, we call it Naimbili Nikoro, people were moved out of the village setting only for life and death situations which they contributed to. So it could be either perceived witchcraft, etc., or things relating to that, but it was never because of identity or sets of beliefs. In the village setting, there was never a household that was pushed to the fringes because of diversity, because of their sexual diversity, because we were always there for each other. The communal belief was we look after our own, and because we're a family unit, we continue to have each other's back. Nobody from the outskirts is allowed to actually bully an individual who belongs to a certain family. Those are concepts of maternity and femininity within the communal settings that we need to relearn and bring back into the picture. And I love how we can make reflections over traditional mat weaving, how women raised children back. Every woman was responsible to raise every child that was walking around in the village, whether it be their own or not. We all experienced that. So that was just something I'd like to add. Thank you.
And can I add to that, Rhonda? Absolutely beautifully articulated. And I think this is the broader discussion around this whole concept of colonial ways of segregating or excluding us based on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, etc., etc. Again, using the matrilineal concept of affirming things, it also recognizes that it gives no permission to anybody to sever genealogical ties. So there's this concept that, you know, again, that our people are constantly having to go through in decolonizing their ways of being, because the ways of being that they currently know today are not the ways of being from our foremothers, and that they're important parts to recognize and continually to talk about when we think about how at all the many converging strands or intersections of our lives, that it doesn't give anyone of our people the permission to sever any tie to our genealogical ties, to our kin, for whatever reasons. And people need to recognize that first and foremost before they start to then use all these other colonial ways of being to disrupt and exclude and only tolerate but not accept people like us.
Yeah, let's admit it. We do not cut off or sever a fully functional arm in the communal settings. If somebody is part of a family and is a contributor and is somebody who's completely able to do Vakavanua things, Songo, etc., and stuff like that, you are of value, whether people like it or not. And it's the white lens that has introduced, if you don't agree, cut it off. That's their concept. That was their approach to things. They demonized a lot of things because it was completely foreign to them. But we must take back and place more value in what was naturally ours, that we created for our own people, and it worked. Nobody else should tell us that it didn't work.
So that really goes into our next kind of conversation around what is our role as Pacifica people or Moana people, and how does that look like for Pacifica people in the fight for collective liberation? And what does it mean within our work, within intersectional identity that we carry and navigate with? Viva, like, what's your theory around, liberation for all of us as Pacifica people, and how does that look like?
I think Felicia and Rhonda was already touching base on, decolonizing and all that. And maybe just to add on that is we will never come to collective liberation as a Pacific when we still have like what 8 or 7 islands still decriminalizing homosexuality. We are one of the very capital highest rate of violence against women, the Pacific region, right? So having to say all that, we can only come to a collective liberation if we put all our differences aside, like how we say that we are Pacific people, we do this, we believe in the Dua Bata, we believe in Matogubale and all, then we have to do the actions. Like example, for us in Fiji, we have Sojusek in our Bill of Rights, but there's no drawdown. So for as long as that is still the issue, then some of us will still have limited our rights and our whatever spaces and whatever truths we want to access will still be limited, right? So I think from my end, if we are really for Pacifica and we want to be a collective liberation, it is only and will be, it'll only be, we only want to be able to do that together collectively if we are willing to look at the root of all this. And patriarchy system is fully enforced in the system that is still serving us today. So unless and until we look into those realities and we plan and we discuss strategically and we really look at each other in the eye with diasporas and we say like, we want to do this work with this and what are your input in this? But making sure that our safety, because we're here on the land, is always still going to be prioritized, So I think those kind of collaboration, the movements are already rising, the work is already happening. But I always feel like sometimes it's just the different approaches, different politics that we tend to cling on too much, we tend to take us away from the main focus of the work, which is about we actually want to all have a liberation. We all want to live a life that that is about acknowledging our liberation and also liberation for our movements, for our human rights. To be able to, at least when our children grow up, they go to school, they don't have to be afraid of saying that they have two mummies, they have two daddies. So until we look into those realities and figure out a way in how to deal with them, because we acknowledge, we appreciate the different intersectionality that we all come with, then we can move to somewhere strategic with how we want to do a collective liberation.
Thank you. Sina, to you. Sorry for putting up the spot, Sina, but the work on liberation and how does that look like for NHPI organizing here in diaspora? How does it look like? And also now the work on segregation on AA and NHPI. And I know some set of work have been done here in Ethiopia is that it's not a celebration, it's not a separation, but it's a wake-up call. And how does it look like in terms of liberation within our community organizing here?
Yeah, thank you, Amasai, for the question. I'm a huge fan of, speaking in our own languages and utilizing our cultural values in the work that we do. I love that Felicia, brought up the concept of La Langa. It just made me think of my mom and all my aunties, right? And like how that really shows up culturally, but also we can bring that into all the spaces that we occupy as well. So I really try to internalize, I truly believe our cultural values is a tool that will help us get to collective liberation. I say that because, one of EPIC's core values is Tauhiba, or I know in Samoan is called Televa. Tauhi to take care of, Va the space between yourself and someone else, or a group of people to another group of people, right? I really believe in maintaining those relationships that we have, with each other, with different organizations across the country that we work with. We all know that this work is definitely not easy, but this I feel like this value for the work that I'm doing, it's already taken me so far, right? And I feel like it will continue to carry me through challenges, but also through times of celebration as well. Um, in this work as a collective, I think when it comes to being grouped with the Asian American community in the U.S., that's we have to have those honest conversations with our colleagues from the AAPI communities, or AAPI serving organizations, right? And I think accountability is a big part of that. We can't talk about collective liberation without honest, hard conversations, without accountability as well. And I think it's super important to remember there is a bigger fight here, right? We cannot afford to fight each other, right? It's never. I want to be very clear with Epic. Like we definitely center our own communities when it comes to our work, but also it's it's totally fine to work alongside our Asian American community as well, right? Um, we just need to be honest about the realities of what that narrative has become in the US for AA and PI communities and AAPI serving organizations.
Thank you. And I
Absolutely
guess
agree.
you really raised like an important thing about having an uncomfortable conversation. It's a very needed thing that needs to have within the movement, because I think it's the very uncomfortable thing that is threatening our lives, and there's a need to have uncomfortable conversation. And moving on, for real change to happen, we need to address structural and systemic issues. The same model of oppression and extraction and global power dynamics continue to play in very different formulas. So the underlying structures inequality remain the same. So we need to link struggles, because a fight for happy, dignified life depends on the intersectional approach of systemic and structural issues. And this leads us to our next topic, our next question around how do we further unpack intersectional inequality within our work and organizing? And really, you know, Felicia, I like the way you, Mama Fee, I like the way you always, the indigenous knowledge that you carry with you. And I remember this in New York during the Outright Summit. The words that you shared, that you always carry women with you wherever you go. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's always having to underline that it's within our organizing, it's within our work that we talk about this. So how do we unpack more of the intersectional inequalities within our work and organizing?
Well, I think the first point is recognizing that there is difference within many parts of the aspect of the work, and I think that's part. It's naive to think that if we were all to come to the table to think about intersectional inequality, that we would all be on the same page, without knowing that there's political aspects that contribute to divisions, that feed into the way in which we are in relationship with each other, the way in which we show solidarity to one another, the way in which we turn up for each other. So I think it's about recognizing that and being honest about it. Back to Zina's point about accountability, it's an important aspect of the journey forward to collective liberation, but also discussing intersectional inequality within our work and with our organizing, because it's one thing to say that we are Pacifica, but what comes with that is that, yes, you're tangata Tonga, you're tangata Fiji, you're tangata Niue, you're tangata Samoa, you're tangata Tahiti, and all those different things. And then looking at all of the structural and systemic things that sit over that, you are operating or you're living within a US patriarchal society, you're living within a French patriarchal society, you're living within a British patriarchal society, because often people think that those contexts to the inequalities that people experience, yes, all again similar, but again, the way in which people operate and organize are different as a result of those many different differing factors. And I think we don't spend enough time navigating those parts of experiences and work and working through or weaving through how we build towards addressing, organizing a whole bunch of things that are at the forefront of what we're impacted by as communities, as peoples. So it's about recognizing that, and then not being immune to be closed off to sharing about, yeah, okay, I get that you might be getting money from these people, but do you realize that these people are also responsible for this, and this? Like, we can talk about the church and we can talk about, for instance, there are ministries that fund church to do work within communities, and then they want to then work with rainbow communities. But it's like, well, hang on a minute here. There's an issue with the fact that these church people are saying these things about rainbow people, and yet you're funding both, and then you're expecting, like, we need to have a conversation around that. How do we bridge that and bring that? And the thing for me is always looking at, like, the unpacking and the interrogating is a key component of my work. It's never ever to sit glass-eyed thinking that you're the technical expert. Of course, we're all technical experts based on our own lived experiences, but we can't sit there glass-eyed thinking that we're across all the issues. You need to interrogate, you need to communicate, you need to understand all the things that are operating around you, under you, on top of you, that are contributing to these things. Because if you're not addressing that, if you're not unpacking that, you're reinventing the wheel that we consistently see that operates every 20 years. What's happening today happened 20 years ago. What happened 20 years ago happened 20 years before that. And that's the thing that we need to be also consolidating in our efforts moving forward, is if we're going to be discussing a whole raft of issues related to Pacific Rainbow peoples, just using that as a general term, I'm not using that as a term that we all live under, but Pacific Rainbow peoples across the diaspora, we need to be unpacking the context of those rainbow people that live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and what that is, those Pacific Rainbow people that live in the US versus those Pacific Rainbow people that live in the different ethnic contexts from different countries in the Pacific, and how that applies to the conversation. And then not a short-term intervention or strategy that's just based on a funding cycle. We need to commit to a longer-term strategy collectively, so that we're passing, this is about succession planning as well. We're passing on what we're thinking about in terms of a vision collectively 20 years from now, and that people that are here today are passing that on to generations 20 years backwards, so that it continues into the future. Otherwise, we're just going to keep reinventing the wheel. And I don't know whether that helps to the question. But I think it is a big aspect of our work and our organizing in order to actually address the inequalities that exist.
Yeah. Viva, what do you have in mind in terms of, unpacking inequality?
Yeah, I think just adding on from Felicia is actually like we have to start thinking about moving away from just being ally to being accomplices of each other's work. We have to learn to be that. Then, of course, then we can shift. We can really move this concept to be a practical thing. Because if not, then intersectionality will always be just a concept that we talk about, we describe, we define. But when we are not putting in effort to be accomplices of each other's work. Like when we are, I think for most of us that are LGBTQI, as LBTI organization, we are done with you talking about our issues in rooms for us, because we are so ready to talk about our own issue in those spaces. So having to say that, you have to push yourself, like move away from being an ally and move towards being an accomplice for our work, which means create the spaces where we can come, create spaces where more diverse people can really engage. And we should move to another notch the fact that it's about representation in a workshop. Yes, we appreciate spaces that are created where we go and we speak, we share our knowledge and stuff. But after that, then what? Because we are more interested in the outcome, in the sausage, what comes out of those meetings. Because then that means that we are really valuing each other's work, that we are really about trying to change something. Because we are done with working with the same system, because most of those systems are just failing us, are actually kind of slowing down the work that we wish that at this point we should be already accomplishing. And then what Sina was talking about, accountability, then we need to be very clear, right? And making sure it's not about to step over each other's work, but it's respecting it, respecting the boundaries that comes with it. But then let's move the other work that we have to do, that we can do it in solidarity. But in a way, from that approach, that it's about accomplices, it's not about ego, it's not about taking over. It's just about, I see the work that you do, I value it, I will support you from where you're working, and I will also do it from here, and I will expect the vice versa from you. I think that, if you really want to unpack that, then we have to move into that.
Thank you, Viva. Mama Ronnie, that leaves you with, how do you really unpack?
How does one follow that, Amasai? How does one follow those amazing responses from the ladies? I'll try and take a bite. My perception, this is a personal opinion, my perception of intersectionality is it's the white person's attempt at trying to understand diversity that exists. We're only speaking that language because we're trying to make sense to white lenses. That's my personal opinion, because our version is more, the question is, how do we further unpack intersectionality? When we speak to each other, we speak using familiar languages and, of course, concepts that we've already found successful within our own spaces. And to us, that is communality. And it's about understanding that we exist in the presence of other people. We contigual existence. What I will do will make sure that it does not harm anybody else, because it's all about communality. Intersectionality is like looking at things in the macro, unpacking the individual. When for us as islanders, as people who belong to the largest ocean basin, it's a given. For us, differences are a given. We know that we only occupy such small spaces within the large ocean. The ocean is actually our shopping mall. We used to go to each other without hesitation. People from Fiji used to traverse the ocean to go to Samoa, used to go to Tonga. And it was all about sharing and understanding that you have resources, we don't. So there needs to be a level of building community. It's always about building community. It wasn't about, let's talk about what makes you different. No, it was all about what brings us together as occupants of the ocean. And connecting that to people living in the diaspora, you've extended that reach. Now that you are there out in the world, we know that you continue to remain connected and cultured, just like some of our sisters sitting here. And I'm so proud to see that it's still alive and well. And I know we share those same experiences. And I'll continue to just focus on that, because we as sisters of the ocean, we don't focus on differences. It's about how do we hold each other's hand and move forward. When we put on our hat to talk about intersectionality, we're trying to make sense to the white society because it's them trying to understand who we are as a diversity. When we, as people of the Pacific, it's a given. That's our responsibility to each other. Knowing that you are different, I still have to exist in the same space as you. I will not harm you, but guess what? We can help each other out. That's how we are as Pacific people. Um, I completely agree with the responses from the ladies before, and uh, that's just my contribution, really. Because you all took the answers straight out of my mouth, and you were all thinking the same thing I was thinking. And this is the unfortunate reality of having to answer last. But thank you, ladies.
So,
Thank you,
Mama
Rhonda.
Ronnie.
Can
Yeah.
I just add to that, please, Amasai? Thank you, Rhonda. I want to acknowledge Kimberly Crenshaw and who coined intersectionality as a term and a concept in relation to Black feminist experiences within a predominantly white feminist movement. I really want to acknowledge that. But I think I take this back to Sina's point around these cultural values, and I think we've all touched on these points, even just what Rhonda was referencing in terms of navigation. As Pacifica people in the diaspora or within the Moana region, and I hate using the word Pacifica because it just makes it like that we all, this homogenous group of people that just have this one culture and this one language. However, I do acknowledge that when we do use that word, it also references, in my understanding, that we're all related across the region. But what I'm alluding to is that we have concepts and methodologies similarly, like lalanga, weaving, that speak or that we can use in our referencing. And I think this is a thing that, if intersectionality is a concept which has been widely used, it's a buzzword, it's introduced in so many parts of work, activism has taken it on, and so many people have reframed it to where it's no longer what its true intentions or its roots were. So I think when we think about these identifying or signifying aspects of intersections within our work, within our experiences, there are cultural methodologies and reference points that we should really embed within our own Pacifica cultures and contexts in our work that really resonate. And the reason why I say this, because it resonates with the people that we say that we fight with, but in the same breath, we need to be working with. And those things are more familiar to them. Those things are, like Te Reva and Samoa, concepts that really retake the focus back to why it's important for us to be advancing the things that we need to be advancing, but why it's also important for them to be a part of that journey with us. And when we use those cultural concepts, I think it really helps us consolidate, heal, nurture, and further develop how we address inequality as peoples.
Amazing. And the work around activism, feminism around the world, and for those of us who've been doing this work for so long, Mama Felicia, I know you've been doing this for more than 25 years, and the rest of you have been doing it for so many years. And we do this because we care about people and community that we serve and we look after, but also then who take care of us when we always at the forefront and ensuring that it's always our body, it's always our activism. And I know Diva has a t-shirt that says, activism is the rent I pay for living on this earth. And really, what price do we pay for doing this work? And what's the win do we gain from actually doing this work? So, really, whoever wants to go first, I'm happy to kind of, hear that about the work done throughout the years, those that have gone before us, and those that are here, and those that are doing this for those of who have yet to come. Mm. Rhonda, Mama Ronnie, Papa T.
Well, what price do we pay? I feel like that's a loaded question. It's so many different things with so many different people, but I think one thing that we can agree on is it it wears away at us. It costs a lot because um, it is sacrifice and a commitment that one person makes. Activism to fight for those who don't have a voice, to step in for those who are not there. Um, it's a heavy load, and because in the concept of regionalism, communality, it's a must as well. We need to understand that when we're standing up for others, we must represent them well and we must do it justice. And that takes a toll on ourselves as a human being with a spirit and a soul and a mind and a body. Um, it takes away a lot from us. But what drives us on is understanding that all this, even though we may not be in existence when we finally see how amazing it is, it's meant for those who follow. That's the win for me. That's what motivates me every day. Understanding that what I do, I may not necessarily experience the the miracle that is peace and freedom for everybody, but I know that somebody along the line needs me to have said this thing so they can get to experience this. That's the win. Um, And in order for one person to do it successfully, we must start speaking the same language. We must start collaborating as opposed to confrontational approaches. We must think of each other as brothers and sisters, and we must hold each other's hand because there will come a time I will be too worn out. And then I look at you, Amasai. I mean, Amasai, you're doing a great job. All I can do now is fan that flame. We do so much at the expense of our entirety. Um, there are times I do go back home and then I realize, what am I doing this for? When I'm feeling so drained. Sometimes the perception is my cup is half empty all the time. Sometimes I feel like I've drained myself out. It's all about the giving and the energy that's required. But we continue to do it because somebody did it before I came into the picture. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I have a responsibility to everybody that follows after me. There is a little trans girl out there who needs to see representations of herself on television. And that could be Mama Felicia, and that could be Sina, and that could be Amasai. They need to see us so that they can grow and know that this is who I can be. This is who I can be better becoming. It's all about representation. And that's why we do what we do. For those who don't have the access and the power or access to these spaces like we do. That's the motivation I have every day. And that's the pat on the back I get every single day when I see that somebody has a smile on their face who comes from my community, that they can walk down the street with a beautiful dress and a pair of heels without flip that hair that came from somewhere. I'm a sign.
We'll keep that conversation for later. But really, Mama Roni, I know you're a mother of a household, and I love
Yes.
it about your home is filled with children who is so much loving, and you provide that. And to me, that's your huge win. And
Yeah.
they see the
That's the
miracle
proudest.
that you
That's the
continue to
proudest
do.
achievement. That's the proudest achievement I have. I can talk about um, portfolios and stuff like that, but my proudest achievement is having a home that is open to young queer people every day. My house is always open, and I've been a glad house mother for more than 15 years now. I don't talk about it too much because I know that the pat on the back, like I was talking about earlier, is seeing them flourish. And I came to the States, Masai, not too long ago. And I just wanted to share something personal with the rest of the sisters. The children that I used to be proud of, who used to live in my home, and they have flown the coop, spread their wings and fly. And then some of them are now in the States. I was hosted by them. I haven't spoken to them in a long while. And it's so great being a mother to amazing people who shine brighter than mother herself and seeing them flourish in different spaces. And that's the pat on the back I have, knowing that they can be who they want to be, because Mama Rondas, Mama Felicia's, Mama Cena's, Mama Viva's existed. And that's the big win for me.
Thank you. And Mama Viva, now to you. What's the price you pay for for doing this amazing work? And what does the win look like for you doing it at the same time?
Yeah, I think I'll speak up from what Rhonda's saying. You know, the winds are amazing. I'll just talk about like 2 weeks ago, myself and a colleague were out in a maritime island, and we were having our Young Women's Network convening. And it was just amazing. I went into this island thinking, to this village, because we had 2022, thinking that this woman would already be knowing about what do they do when they go through violence. They should be all aware of what's happening around us. And then, to our surprise, that there was these women that they don't even know how to access all these services. They don't even know. They've heard of such an organization. They don't even know that there's particular kind of organization that works specifically on different issues of women around existing in Fiji. And I think having to be there at that time and enlightening them and sharing with them the knowledge. And now we are packing up 40 packages of all resources, just resources, to send them back to the island. And I think those are the kind of wins that we get out of this work. And for me, being an LGBTI woman and being in countries such as Fiji, my wins are also about having a very supportive group that celebrates my good days and also my bad days, but also at the same time holding me, making sure that I don't lose my way again and fall back to where I actually felt like I would have thought that was the end of me. So that is kind of my win, my gains. Coming to know about my other feminist sister and know that they will always have my back regardless if I'm being an ass at times. I think some of the price we pay could actually be us losing each other through the journey as good friends. I might say I have a few friends that I started this journey with, and today we've decided different tracks, and we still hold each other close to our hearts, but it's because of the work that we've decided to, we'll have to go. I appreciate what I think Felicia was saying, that at times we need to take some time to actually understand the work and the people we're working with, because at some point we really do get carried away, either because of the funding system or we tend to lose each other in that process. And I think those are some of the price that being an activist we pay, because we could really be amazing activists for each other for this big job, and we all need each other. But sometimes it's sad that it comes down to that we lose each other. And that's just some price that we have to pay. And I think also some of the price that we pay, we have feminist friends who have burnouts because I'm just here for 10. Some that I'm working with, they've been here for 30 to 40, and they still holding the front line So I also take my hats off for them because that's a price that they decided to pay. But does that mean that they give up? No, they don't, because they worry about the little vivas that are still coming, the little rounders on the sides. So yeah, I love the wins, but I love the fact that we can have this kind of straight kind of conversation. Let's also talk about the loss and talk about how do we make sure that we help each other. So we really move away from these challenges and really gain extra strength so we can do the work better.
I think the beauty about it, Viva, you said it so perfectly, is that a lot of time doing this work, we only talk about the beauty of the work and we forget about the ugliness of how it looks like. And you also really pointed out, that the personal is political and the political is personal. That we always have to give it in, and losing people, friends along the way. But it makes me remember my first ever workshop and training was actually with Viva. That's how I met Viva in my very young days of studying the work on, joining the movement. And it was on sexual reproductive health and rights. And I'm like, what are they talking about? I don't know all this. And thanks to Viva who have really guided me throughout my journey, and nameless people who have been part of that. And really, Sina, how does that look like for you?
Thank you, Amasai. I think for this question, I think the first thing that came to mind was emotional labor. And the toll that it takes on specifically on us, on as women, right? Um, I think physical, mental labor is factored into that too. But yeah, I think the price that we have to pay in this work sometimes is the emotional labor, right? Um, I think the win the win I personally gain from doing this work is meeting amazing people like you. I actually met Amasai in person for the first time last month, actually, in Seattle. I was on a work trip. And so, yeah, here we are on a panel. And I intend to maintain and you know, uh, help with Amasai as we fight alongside in this work. Um, but I think also, I think Felicia had alluded to this point in the beginning of, thinking long term of um, what kind of ancestors do we want to be in this work, and I think doing this together um, is helping us shape that, right? Shape that role for each of us.
Thank you, Mama Felicia. So what's the price we pay? What's the price you pay in your activism role? And what's the win?
Let's start with the wins. The win is I get to serve my people first and foremost. That's an absolute win. Service to my people is a win, regardless. There's nothing that denies anybody that service is not something of a win, but it does come with its sacrifices. There's a balance to this. There's a sacrifice, and there's also the beautiful aspects of doing the work and across all forms of leadership. I think about the many sacrifices. I've been doing this work a long time. With many people that we've lost along the way that contributed equally to this work, and the price we pay is that we only carry memories of them. And that in itself is, for me, never enough, because they should be immortalized as pioneers, and often their memories are just faded as people pass on. So I think about the sacrifices that we collectively have a responsibility to continue to say those names, to keep those names alive in the movement. But that in itself is the sacrifice for many who struggle just to do their day-to-day work, let alone remember people who have contributed or have pioneered or paved the way. I mean, I think about my own personal sacrifices. Like, I've been doing this work like almost 30 years, and this is a moment in time where I should have a whole, many other people that want to continue this work. But today, that's unfortunately not the reality. Not everybody wants to be an activist. Not everyone wants to fight to continue to advance the many things that impact, whether it be human rights related, whether it be a resourcing thing, whether it be just to fight for a shelter, whether it to be addressed, the multitude of issues that impact on us from all different parts of where we live and situate ourselves. And this should be the time that I retire and I'm spending the last days of my mother's life with her every moment of the day. But I can't do it because, so it's a sacrifice for me. It's a sacrifice for me that I am away from not being back on my land with my mother, to just be with her throughout her last days and just to relish in that and be with her just for the sake of being with her. But there's also a win in that, because the work that I do contributes to her livelihood and to her well-being. And so, but then there's also the sacrifices of the many fears of the unknown into the future and what it might look like. This world is not a great place to be living in right now for so many different reasons. And I fear for younger generations not seeing this as a viable way to continue activism as something that upholds and maintains progressing rights for people like ourselves, because they see us hurt through this work. They see us attack this work. That for them it's be like, stuff that. Why the hell do I want to do that for? I'm going to go be with social media. I'm going to go make money, IT guru. Like, there are so many competing factors that continue to contribute to why. And so I think about that. I think about the longer the strategies. But, I really, on the deficit, talking about a deficit, I really wanted to just end my point on this around, when do we come to the realization of our collective power in the Pacifica region? There are 22 Pacific Island countries and territories. Correct me if I'm wrong, there are probably more. And on a global platform, on a regional platform, like, this is the coordinating that we need to be thinking about in terms of a longer strategy. If we are going to be breaking that ceiling, we need to understand that power. We need to understand that we all come with 22 different ways of doing things. We have 22 different ways of addressing things to the issue. We come with 22 votes. China's a billion people, they get one vote. The same as the US. So until we start thinking about those strategies, those things won't become a reality for us to see the true prosperity and win for us as a people. And we need to harness on those things. We need to really start looking at the geopolitics. We need to start addressing what our leaders are starting to sell us under the table to bargain for climate change. They're going to, side with conservative countries so that women's rights or LGBTQI rights are no longer a thing in our country, because they need the conservative countries to support them at the global level. But we collectively, as Pacifica Rainbow peoples, if we start to harness and look at ways and strategies to address this collectively, that in itself is going to be a powerful win that a lot of people won't be able to contend with. But I also believe in unicorns and aliens and mushrooms. but you know, it's just in my thinking as I'm thinking out aloud that those are the things we and I think Sina said this in the beginning, that we're told that we're too small, or we need to start no longer be thinking that way. That if we start thinking about this from a geopolitical aspect, we're quite powerful if we stand together. And those are the things and those systems and those processes that we need to learn to use better. Mm-hmm. And that it is about, when we talk about fight, we talk about fight in the Western context, but in our cultural context, we need to talk about building, healing, mending, establishing relationships. That's an important aspect in our work moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mama Fee, for those, lovely words. And really, it carries a lot of value and wisdom and manner that you shared in the and really, Eroni, Mama Ron. So the Pacific Sexual Gender Diversity Network, country partner, Rainbow Pride Foundation, Fiji, did groundbreaking research for LGBTQI people in Fiji. This is particularly on humanitarian response and disaster risk reduction. It is important to consider the ways in which different identities intersect and lead to different experiences of displacement, and humanitarian response must use intersectionality and ensure that inclusion of people of intersectional identities are in decision-making processes. So what has worked progressively now that there is a set of amazing research work to show the inequality within humanitarian response and disaster risk reduction? And are there any regional mechanisms that work for LGBTQI movements?
Thanks, Amsai. Before I answer that question, I just like to just a comment. I'm really hoping that this platform, this recorded session, or this live session is available to all those powers that actually levy these prices that we have to pay because of the work that we do. Institutionalized patriarchy, donors. We give them credit for all the support that they do, but for those of us in the small island developing states, the conversation is about how harder they have actually made things for us in terms of accessing this kind of resources, without taking into consideration that there are varied capacities. And there needs to be a universal shared mindset and approach to accessing this kind of resources. We burn out because we are struggling with the institutionalized patriarchy, and we are struggling with basically hyper-masculinized spaces. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to work our asses. And I really hope that these people who levy these charges every day, that we have, the prices we have to pay, come to realize that these are the lived realities of those of us who are at the forefront. It's a sacrifice. I've heard that word used so many times amongst the sisters sitting here. It's a sacrifice. It shouldn't be a sacrifice. It should be a requirement. We shouldn't be fighting to exist, but we must fight for those who don't have a voice. That's the price we have to pay. We shouldn't be actually paying for these prices. So I really do hope that they hear us out. And of course, I thank you, Toby, for creating this platform for discussion. Now, with regards to the work that RPF has done, RPF is a national member organization of the Pacific Sexual and Gender Diversity Network, who I work for. One of the many organizations from Fiji that's part of our network, alongside other member organizations from across the Pacific. Now, Rainbow Pride Foundation successfully came up with a research report called Down by the River. Amasai is familiar with this when she was working with Rainbow Pride Foundation. This report came out with some quite stake in the heart kind of data, where we had members of our community providing testimonies of how they survived Cyclone Winston, and it was really tragic to see that their testimonies were from refusing to go to evacuation centers because of the fear, and of course the only alternative is to weather the storm. And God knows Cyclone Winston was around for quite a while in Fiji, and community members were living under trees, under stilted houses, weathering the storm because of the fear. And if they were trying to access resources that were actually provided to these evacuation centers, they'd have to provide sexual favors. If they ever wanted to have access to food, a basic necessity. And that's beginning to pull at the heartstrings. And that's what our people have to go through every single day. And to have an overwhelming reaction from that report from state partners and development partners was great for Rainbow Pride Foundation, because it allowed conversations to happen with the national disaster mechanisms, and of course DRR, and of course services along those lines, which organizations like Viva's, Diva for Equality, Rainbow Pride Foundation here in Fiji, and I'm sure there are other testimonies as well that existed within the Pacific, those who went through Winston. But it was so important that that data was available, because now there are amendments made to addressing and of course the provision of resources and evacuation centers. They're much more careful. Reporting is now required to reflect JETSI. And of course, SOGIESC is now part of the conversation. The unfortunate thing is most of these changes are prompted by donors, and because they financed and funded this report, like Oxfam. Oxfam provided support in developing this report. They prompted the need for the change. Now, conversations are having with states on how they could adapt this information. It may be at snail pace, but it's great that it's now certain aspects of reporting are now reflecting SOGI and JETSI on national level. Now, with regional mechanisms, we all know that there is no Pacific human rights mechanism, which is so unfortunate when we come from cultures that are quite communal driven. Sisters reflected this earlier, Felicia and Sina, how there's a familiarity with all of our conversations because of community. And we might need to take that approach to finally come together and organize a human rights mechanism within the Pacific. But with regards to this report, Rainbow Pride Foundation, I'm also on the board for Rainbow Pride Foundation. Rainbow Pride Foundation has successfully infiltrated spaces like cluster systems, like the Pacific Resilience Partnership, and of course the Framework for Resilience Development in the Pacific. Now, those are cluster systems specific to climate change and disaster risk reduction. We've managed to use that as a pathway to have the conversation using this data as evidence to why there's a need to reflect SOGI in all of the reportings, in all of the provision of resources, etc. But at the risk of boring all of the viewers, I can put it in a nutshell. The work is happening and there is some success. There has been some adaptation from other organizations within the Pacific of this report, and there is work to developing more research to collect more data in other countries within the Pacific. And PSGDN is working very hard to securing that funding that is needed to support these organizations on the ground. They are slow, but they're very much welcomed. We're very happy with whatever we can get out of it. But that conversation needs to continue, and we need to come together, because I still feel that may be an isolated conversation that's happening. We definitely need each other. There needs to be a much more Pacific approach to how this needs to be done. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
Why did you ask me a technical question, Masai?
Yeah. Yeah, that research is available online to anyone can access it, down by the river. It's an amazing set of research done by the Bright Foundation. And I also know that Diva for Equality had launched their research work, and maybe Viva can talk about that. Really important work around humanitarian response and disaster risk reduction. And I know there are mechanisms within the region that's working to address that well. Thank you very much, Ironi. Sina, you look lovely today. I love the is it the light that you're using? I love that.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So, Sina,
You have a glow, I know, right?
APIC, such an amazing organization. APIC engages in the political advocacy work statewide and federally by having an advocacy tool for building political power in, with, and for NHPI community. It is from within this framework that APIC takes action to tackle the issues that impact Pacifica people. So, Sina, what is the role of the state and government in our movement, in our movement work, and what's the limitation?
Thanks for the question, Amasai. I think first and foremost, I think it's super important to recognize that as Pacific Islanders, um, who live and experience, what it means to be a Pacifica person, right, in the U.S. is under a system that is subscribed to colonization, right, imperialism, and that's hard, right? That's hard for many of us who do this work. That's hard for our communities. Um, I think second, too, just even the term Pacific Islander, right, is it's a geopolitical identity, right, that was given to us without our consent or even permission. Um, and I think what the role of the government is, um, with our community is to listen to us and to let us tell our own stories. And I think also too, along with that, to establish a consistent rapport with our community as well. As much as, this country operates under systems of colonialism and capitalism at that, this is the game that is at play, right? And if we have two choices. We can, not advocate for our own communities. We can just let other people do that for us. We can let other people tell our stories, or we can do it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And I think by listening to us, especially with issues that impact our communities, here we know our communities best. We also know that we give the utmost care for our communities as well. No one will ever care about us the way we do. I strongly believe that. And I also believe that our best looks very different from everyone else's best, right? We go way above and beyond for our communities. But that's for us as Pacifica people, as Pacific Islanders, that's what it takes. That's what we know what it takes, right? we never do anything mediocre. We never do anything, especially when it comes to ceremony, especially when it comes to, right, taking care of each other in the village, right? And we apply the same values in the work that we do as well, right? So I think as far as their role, it's really just making sure that it's not like a one-time like meeting with our community, right? When it comes to issues that we need to address, it needs to be consistent,
Yeah.
right? And they need to recognize who we are, and the role that we play as Pacific people in this country.
Yeah. Thank you, Sina. Really important points that you raised. Um, so Viva for Equality, I know for a fact that, something that I've learned that I've taken on board is the use of practices and principles for action and reflection, science to develop, to refine, to strengthen our work. The amazing set of work that you all do, in local, national, regional, and global movement is intersectional. And when do we when we need to unpack building movements, and why is intersectional movement building important, and how do we strengthen that as that's within the diaspora region and the Pacific region, building movement that is more than just solidarity, and how does praxis and principle guide your work?
Thank you, Amsa. Well, how many questions is that in one?
It's
Well,
it's intersectional. You get it.
I'll just
We reach
start
that
by
stage.
maybe I'll just start with saying, like first we need to, self-define what is movement building approaches, right? Because sometimes we think that we are working from a perspective that it's about building a movement, and later on we kind of got caught in the sense like you realize, oh, this might not be my tips that I'm building with. We are totally have different dominant, different principle that we work from, right? And that should be okay. Maybe just to talk about Diva and how Diva, why Diva prioritize that is the fact that if we work from a movement building approach, our work will never go wrong because it's always going to be about the people and not about you or the organization. The organization and the work will exist because of the people. So if you are doing the work because you want to build the movement, then you're going to be very clear with your approaches. And the praxis guide that. The praxis guide that in terms of it's not an easy work. Sometimes you will fall. Sometimes you will be called out. Sometimes you will fail, right? But then how do you get up again? So the praxis allow you to have that. Praxis approach allows you to, there's a moment you act, you stop, you reflect, but then you act again. Doesn't mean that you stop just because you fail once, just because you got it wrong one time. One of the things that Diva also talk about is the 30 and the 70% work, which means like when you get it wrong, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times, think about all the rest of the time that you've been doing the work, you've been getting it right, that you were part of all those movement building spaces, that you were part of the crew that's marching down the streets, holding a banners, putting yourself and your body the forefront. And think about also those words. So don't, like Rhonda said, don't beat yourself up too bad. The praxis approach allows you to do that. It allows you to give a moment to yourself to reflect again and maybe change some ways, which is which is highly needed in this work, because there is no mandate, there is no toolkit book to teach us how to be an activist. We're just learning. I don't know from you again, but from my experience, I'm just learning from all the work that's being done out there, because every day there's a different kind of struggle we are against. There's a different kind of challenge. The issues are not the same. As we are progressing in certain issues, there are other ones that we need to change our mind game in, because that is getting looked down. Somebody behind those closed doors are negotiating, are selling some off to gain others. And if we are to talk about, how can we do this better with diasporas? Yes. To be honest, Viva had never worked with anyone, with any groups from diasporas, right? We had never, because we are always careful in how do we interpret with each other. I'm grateful for this opportunity where we are starting our conversation topic. We need to be real on the different geographical location, because that's all part of intersectionality. Different identities that we bring into this space, different focus of the work that we prioritize, different issues we choose to prioritize even. We need to put that all down on the table, and then let's move from there. One of the things that we easily do with South feminist group that just supporting the work that we do on the ground is most of these organizations, NGOs, we didn't have the privilege to be accessing visa cards, right? So when you have to go to attend meetings in somewhere like New York, if you have to book prior, you have to use visa cards, right? So what do these South feminists do? They do it for us. Why do we need to keep doing this if there's a solid, specific group on the ground, some in the States, could easily do that for us? Those are some of the accomplishments of the work that we can do for each other. But we have to always be careful. Why we always be careful is that for us, we have to be careful on sharing of space, pocket space, because you might be in a room full of decision makers. Let's use climate change as an example. You could be in a room with decision makers where they're talking about resilience and stuff, because you've left home for quite a while. You can be talking about it like, oh, we are resilient people, we can do it. But in the movement on the ground, we're not that anymore. We are demanding that the urgency of action is very important right now. We want to talk about accountability. We want to hold some people, not countries, are very responsible. Mm-hmm. So it's important that we do the work together, but let's be real. Let's bring all the cards on the table so we can be clear. This is what we can negotiate on. This might be the ones. Let's just not touch it, but let's be accomplices of each other's in those spaces. Because I think the work is much needed, this kind of work. But we have to be careful with each other so we can be dangerous together, as one of my friends always say. And I think that's kind of important. Thanks.
Thank you. We need more accomplices in this work. And thank you for sharing that there's a need to have praxis and principles in our work in order to keep moving. And to Mama Felicia, I love you so much. So I know you're currently at the event, the Manalangi project, which is New Zealand's first Pacific Rainbow Health and Wellbeing, which is the first of its kind that is investigating both general and healthcare specific experience for Pacific. Correct me if I'm wrong, AMFAF?
MVP FAF.
Yeah, communities in Aotearoa. So MVP FAF stands for Mahu, Vakasaleolewa, Palopa, Fafine, Vakavahine, Fakaliti, Fakafifine. And you have created this acronym so beautifully, MVP. And so what are some critical findings that out of this project, knowing that our Pacifica community have the highest percentage of non-communicable diseases? What are some risk factors and conditions that impact the lives of LGBTQI individuals, their families, communities, and what are the inequalities?
Thank you, Amasai. I just want to start first by saying that even though I coined the mnemonic MVP5 Plus, it started from experiences of just under 50 Pacific activists that attended the Asia Pacific Out Games Human Rights Conference here in Wellington, where I currently am. And as a result of me being a keynote speaker, there were 3 Pacific keynote speakers. I was the last one on the last day. And we had Pacific Caucus. One of my responsibilities was to change my keynote to reflect our experiences during that forum, because it was like, there were about 500 people here, but it was almost like the predominantly Palangi white people were the ones that people focused on. And anytime there was someone from the Pacific presenting, it was only the brothers and sisters from the Pacific sitting in their workshops and their presentations, smiling at them. And nobody else was interested. So MVP5 came as a way to really, MVP5 Plus came as a way to really challenge the use of LGBTQI plus under its Western construct and its meaning and applicability, but also the 7 identities within that mnemonic. The plus is to recognize there are 22 Pacific Island countries and territories that each have their own signifying identity terms for either related to sexual orientation, gender identities, and gender expressions. So that term culminated as a form of activism towards a cohort of people that were ignoring us. The Manalangi Project, we are in its 2nd year. And yes, it is the first ever Pacific Rainbow LGBTQI plus queer MVP5 plus health and wellbeing study in this country, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a progressive country. But our experiences as Pacific Rainbow people have often been that when we were surveyed or when we were researched, we were often told that our sample was too small, so we would be put under Māori people, but we wouldn't be recognized as Pacific. We would just count as Māori. Or, for instance, a Pacific trans woman, if she was to do an HIV/AIDS survey, the sample would be too small, so she wouldn't be reflected as a trans woman. She'd be reflected as an MSM. And again, it invisibilized the experiences of trans women, Pacific trans women. So Siota'awhili, Dr. Patrick Thompson, who's the principal investigator for the Manalangi Project, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland, came back from Korea, actually finishing his PhD in Seattle, and came back and said, Auntie Fee, we've progressed, we've had marriage equality, civil unions, things must be wonderful for our people, our communities here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no data on our experiences. There's nothing that can inform policy or legislation other than people talking in silos about their lived experience. And there's no data. And he was like, what? So we went on this journey to look at ways that we could find money to eventually have a research project. But one of the different things that we did, because researchers often what they do is they put in their applications, and within the applications they also have the ethical considerations or proposal, and they often get that approved first, then they go into the community and do their research. We did it the opposite way. We wanted to go into the communities and say, is this relevant to us? Are these the questions that we should be asking? And then we embedded that back into the ethics proposal and then presented it to the ethics committee, because it was important for us to, 1, consult and engage our communities, but 2, to have their feedback directly into that. Now, we haven't consolidated the data. The survey has been live for just over 5 months, and it closes at the end of this month. What I'm here doing in Wellington is a survey party, inviting people that haven't done the survey to come and catch up with Patrick and myself, and just complete the survey on some tablets that we have here. And we've been doing it all over the country in key communities, just as a reconnecting with people, but just giving people the opportunity to come and catch up with us and to do the survey. Our intentions and our hopes are that yes, it will specifically speak to key findings, but in terms of, and we're focused across 5 areas: health, so general health, mental health, community, spirituality, religion, spirituality, religion, and community are all in one. And the last one was family. And the difference of this survey is not only is it for Pacific Rainbow people to complete, there's also another part to the survey where our family and our allies can fill out the survey. So we've just had just under 1,000 respondents to the survey, just over 400 Pacific Rainbow peoples, and then equally about the same amount for our families and allies. And it was important for us to reflect that in our findings because, one, as Pacific Rainbow peoples, we don't live in isolation of our families. And it was important to have their involvement in this. So there are key questions for families and allies, and then there are general questions for our Pacific Rainbow communities. And why that is important? Because one, this is the first door that is opening. We want to give the opportunity to other Pacific Rainbow researchers, scholars, academics, community groups to start using the findings from the Manalangi project to then say, oh, there's some gaps that we've identified from this research, because we believe this will generate this movement of building strong evidence base from our communities. And why this is important, because we know from the top down, often we are told by decision makers, you don't have any evidence, therefore it's anecdotal. We can't progress any issues. We can't finance this. We can't resource this. So it's another approach to ensuring that even though Manalangi is just touching the surface in terms of a research agenda, we are hoping that this continues to expand, and not just here in Aotearoa. It provides everyone within the diaspora, within the Pacific region, to use the Manalangi stepping stone as a way to continue to use research and evidence base to start addressing, highlighting the impacts on their communities, and using their evidence base to advocate for what they need to be advocating for. And Manalangi is just, again, one approach to research, because as we've heard from Rhonda, we've seen from amazing groups like Diva for Equality, through PSGDN, through the Tonga Ladies Association, from EPIC, from Utopia, everybody is doing this work already in terms of research agendas, and it's important that we continue to keep this momentum moving forward, because ultimately it's not going to give anyone any more excuses to deny us with the strong evidence that we're putting forward.
Thank you so much, Mount Felicia. Really amazing research work done to really bring to light the lived realities of Pacifica Rainbow community in Aotearoa.
I'm sorry, one thing,
yeah.
sorry. The Manalangi project has a website, manalangi.org, and there is a repository of so many things Pacific Rainbow. And I encourage you that if you want to place any publications or any of your work, contact the website people, because we want to also encourage our communities to consolidate their work so that it keeps a DNA of the things that you have doing, publications in general, video, archival footage, anything that you want to put out. There's an opportunity for you to have it on that platform, so that we, again, continue this documenting our histories and herstories.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I want to close by quoting our Deputy Director, Angetupu. One of her kind words that she wrote to me was, as we were doing this work on organizing our regional work here at Utopia, Washington, is we ask for open hearts and open minds to co-create a collective, a partnership to connect the diasporic organizing here on Turtle Island with our roots in our respective island nations. It is a collaboration centered on creating and or strengthening mechanisms that honors and lives the critical work being advanced by relatives in this space. Decades of work built on the brilliance of our ancestors, unquote. And um, these words have always been so encouraging, knowing that even though we're separated by wherever we are, but it's the ocean that really connects our work and what we do within our different communities. And in a few words, with your closing remarks, how can we continue to build solidarity that is really, really, really transformative and not performative within our movement and within our region, within the islands? How do we really coin and table this amazing word that we all like to use, solidarity? It's open.
Let me get my
Oh,
okay.
go ahead, Rhonda. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Okay. Let me get mine out of the way. Um, Thank you, Masai. Thank you all for everything that you've been sharing. So I think it's just going back to what makes us who we are as an Indigenous people and understanding that we are co-inheritors and we're co-custodians of the lands that we occupy. I think a lot of our community members don't understand that we are very strong and we are very strong together. We may just be 6% of indigenous population, global population, compared to the global population, but we occupy 80% of this world. That's powerful, and we need to start realizing that again. And of course, decolonizing our minds and continuing to work together like this. And of course, having more support mechanisms to carry this journey on for us to come together. And yeah, thank you. I've loved all your companies, and I hope I get to see all of you again.
Viva?
I just have a short one. Let's not mistake assertiveness as an oppression tool. For us to do this work together and better, then we need to learn to be assertive. It's not about personalizing, it's not about the person, but it's about the work. To move the work, then we need to make sure that we are ready to be assertive in how we have conversation in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mama Felicia? Is it solidarity or is it formative?
Well, I think those words in itself are problematic. It's like, the way that we conference, like, let's change that model. Let's just come and converge and sit and sing and eat and imagine what our ancestors imagined for future generations. Let's Talanoa about the land. Let's Talanoa about our cultural concepts and ways of being and knowing and doing. Why do we got to continue framing ourselves in operation? Because why? We receive money from people that expect us to do this. And that's a big part of the work that we need to have people know. This is how we want to do it. If you want to be a partner, partnership means provide us the money, but let us lead the work. And I think those are the things that we really need to be breaking the mold, because it's been too long that we've just been confined to be operating and being appeasing to donors and funders, and because they say they're accountable to their taxpayers, and then that generates a different outcome for us and our people. And those are the things that I think about in terms of revisiting what our ancestors envisioned for future generations, revisiting what true solidarity or the concept of solidarity means to us and our cultural ways of being, knowing, and doing, and how we hold each other accountable when people want to be performative but don't want to be responsible for not doing the work or putting communities at risk again and again and again. Those are the spaces that we need to reinvent and reimagine.
Thank you. I love what you said. Like, we need to get together and sit around and, sing, and my favorite word, eat food and gather. And one thing that I've learned just being part of the Utufa family, and with my sisters, that we like to gather and tungu, and that's like, sisters, come on, I want to go tungu with everybody, and just being able to have fun and tungu when we, after a long day of work. It's what we like to do here. And Sina, what are your takeaways and words of really solidarity that is transformative and not performative?
Thank you, Amasai. Completely agree with everyone here and what they've shared. I think just to build off of what has been shared is, I think it means for me, very much to similar to what Felicia said about we have our own ways and systems of doing things, right? I 100% agree and believe in that as well. I think part of that too is, in any space that I occupy, and if I'm asked questions about my community, or I'm asked for recommendations of other folks people can reach out to, or sometimes people just only ask for like one person, right, or one recommendation. I always make sure I give them a list, because that is how we move in our community, right? We don't ever move in I'm not just going to give you one recommendation. I'm not just going to, talk about one person in the community. I'm going to give you options, because that is how we move in our Pacifica cultures as well, right? So especially for myself, and just for EPIC as an organization of, occupying a lot of spaces and, asking the question of what about our queer and trans folks, right? What about the LGBTQ community, right? We need to ask those questions, especially if we don't see any queer or trans folks in the room, right? That's super important, as for us as an organization and for myself as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you all for sharing and really lightening, giving light and hope to the amazing work that we all do, and addressing the intersectionality and inequality, and giving real Tangata Pacifica perspectives in how we deal with this work differently. The wisdom of our elders, the knowledge that they carry with us as well, the mana, and knowing that no pride for some of us without liberation for all of us is something that we take on. And also, Sina, you shared a very important note that you said is showing up for trans and queer Pacific Island people and how that's important. And before we end, I would like to thank the beautiful panelists for sharing your brilliance and educating our communities. Vinaka Vakalevo, and a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. And on behalf of our executive director, Teffy Maine Johnson, and all of us here at Utopia, Washington, Fafa Talilava, and thank you for being with us at tonight's Talanoa. Have a blessed and wonderful night. Vinaka.
Vinaka vakalevu, Masai.